It doesn't matter what photo editing software you use. Once you complete this photo editing tutorial, you can easily edit images like these, since I will share everything you need to know to get these pro results. Plus, if you stay to the end, I'm going to share my favorite editing tool, which can transform your skies from ordinary to extraordinary like these. If we've never met, my name is Chris Parker, and I've been a pro photographer and instructor for 35 years. So let's jump into my editing software of choice, Lightroom Classic. Again, if you're not using Lightroom, that's okay, because your editing software has the same editing tools I'm sharing today. If yours doesn't, I'd be surprised to hear that. So let me know in the comments what photo editing software you use and the missing tool, and I can probably find it for you, since sometimes it might have a different name. All right, so here's the image that I'm going to be working on, and as you can see, it's extremely underexposed. Visually, we can see that, and we can also see that in the histogram because we have a huge gap on the right, which is an indication of underexposure. And I did this on purpose because I wanted to expose for the sky to ensure that I created or captured all the detail in the sky without losing any of the colors or the detail in the sky. And that created a major underexposure for our subject here in the foreground and the middle ground here as well. So we need to fix that. Now, once you jump into your editing software of choice, a lot of times we can get overwhelmed with all the different editing options that we have available. So the place to start is up here at the top with your tonal values. So you can increase your shadows to bring out the detail in that part of the tonal range. You can adjust the highlights to recover the details in the highlights, like the sky. The whites will make everything brighter. The blacks, darker. The exposure is going to adjust the brightness level of the midtones. And if we look at our histogram now, we can see that the shape of that histogram has changed, and we've now filled in the histogram, or the information from blacks to whites has been completely filled in. If I go ahead and reset this, you can then see again how that histogram looks originally without any edits. Now, if you have this option, most software does have this option. What I would recommend is starting off with an AI feature. Like in Lightroom, we have Auto that uses artificial intelligence to auto-magically edit the photo and adjust the tones according to its technology. And then again, we can see that histogram is very similar to what I had when I made my adjustments, but I didn't have the exposure as high. So I may want to bring the exposure down. I may want to adjust some of these other sliders based on my personal preference. Now, for me, we can see that this image is much better, but it looks nothing like the final edit. This is amazing. This is a beginner's type of edit. So how do we go from here to here? Well, what we have to do is we have to target different parts of the image in order to apply these tonal adjustments, in order to get that detail in the shadows, the highlights, to bring out the colors and everything else. So this is not a sky replacement in Photoshop. It actually came from the original file, and the colors and the details are there. We just have to choose the correct editing tools in order to bring out those details, as well as the color is natural. This is the natural color at this time of day, which is blue hour. So during blue hour, the color of light is going to be blue to purple, and it might be a little bit warmer depending on how close to golden hour you are. This might be like a few minutes after golden hour, which is why I still have some warmth in the overall image. And the pigment of the rocks as well take on these blue and pink and purple tones based on the color of light being displayed on them at the time of capture. So I didn't do any adjustments as far as hue adjustments to change the colors in the image. This is all natural color that was captured at the time of creating this image. So how did I do that? Well, like I mentioned, you have to target different parts of the image, and you can do that either with creating new layers and targeting different parts with layer masks and doing what is known as dodging and burning. So making parts of the image brighter or darker. But most editing software nowadays has these tools built in without having to use layers like in Photoshop or Photoshop Elements or even GIMP. So if we click on this masking icon here, I can select the sky. Lightroom will automatically detect that sky and then make a mask out of it. So if we click right here on this red box, I like to change the color of my mask when that color, which is this color by default, is similar to the colors in my scene. So in this instance, I have blues, purples, reds, things like that. So it's kind of hard to see that overlay. So I may want to choose a green color and then change the opacity to see where that particular mask was being applied. Now, it's not 100% perfect. We can see that there is some masking going on this subject right here, this monolith or this ridge right here. So what we can do is we can subtract from that mask with a brush. Now, it's not going to make a huge difference on my subject, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to invert my mask, and then because those edits are being applied in the sky a little bit, once it's inverted, it's going to create a ghosting effect. So it's going to look like a halo around your subject. So let's go ahead and leave it like that, and I'll show you what that looks like once we get to that part of the editing. Now, I typically like to do my skies first, but we're going to do that last. So I'm going to go ahead and right click and select duplicate and invert my mask. So again, any editing software nowadays should be able to do this for you quickly and easily. I'm going to go ahead and change the mask opacity here to be a little bit lower, and then I can apply edits for my tonal range on this part of the image. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's also go ahead and turn off the show overlay so we can see what we're doing as we're editing. So it's very, very dark right now. I could increase the exposure, but look how flat that is down. There's not a lot of contrast in that part of the image now. So I'm going to go ahead and undo that with Command or Control plus the letter Z to undo that. Or what you can do is you can double click right here and that will reset it. So what I want to do is I just want to target the white tonal value. So if we take a look at our histogram here, we have blacks, shadows, exposure, which is the midtones, highlights, and then whites. So this whites slider is going to target the pixels in this part of the tonal range, and I want that to be brighter. So I'm going to increase this a lot to brighten up that monolith. And I think I'm going to go right about there, and then maybe darken it up just a little bit with the blacks to maybe around -8 to -10 or something like that. Now, it's still too dark, so what I want to do is I want to go back to my tonal values here and make some adjustments. So I think I'm actually going to increase my exposure to about 1.5 stops. I'm going to reset the contrast slider here because I like to apply my contrast with presence and or the tone curve. And I'll show you how these texture, clarity, and dehaze sliders add contrast in just a moment. I also want to reset my highlights, and you're going to notice as soon as I reset this, the overall image gets brighter. So there we go. So it's much brighter, and there's really not a whole lot of highlights in this part of the image. So I don't really need to recover the highlights there, but I will need to apply more highlights in the sky to bring out those details. So if I bring my highlights all the way to -100, you're going to notice this part of the image gets darker. So it was subtle, but it is darker. And that's why we want to target different parts of our image to ensure we get the correct tonal value for that part of the image. So my shadows, I think, are a little bit too bright, so I'm going to bring that down. I'm also going to bring my whites down just a little bit. And I think my blacks are way too dark. So I'm going to come down to around -30 to -32. So maybe right around there. And then I'm going to add just a touch of contrast to the entire image by increasing Dehaze. Let's go back into our masks and let's go ahead and target other parts of the image now. So what I think I want to do is I want to increase Dehaze for this part of the image. So just a tad to add a little bit more contrast. Let's take a look at the before and after. And you can definitely see the highlights and the shadows are much more defined than they were before. And it's a little bit brighter and has more contrast. And that's just based on those 3 edits. So let's talk about the effects panel here real quick for texture, clarity, and dehaze. And what they are doing is they're targeting different parts of the image in terms of the size of the detail, and it's adding contrast to the edges of those details, which also gives the impression of sharpening. So texture is going to target smaller details, clarity a little bit larger, and then dehaze, it's going to target larger sized details, and it's going to have the biggest effect in terms of the amount of contrast that is going to be visible in your scene. And it's a lot more dramatic with dehaze versus clarity and texture, depending on how many of those details are visible in your scene in terms of the size of those details. Now, I have some images from Antelope Canyon where clarity did a better job of providing sharpness and contrast versus dehaze and texture. So it all depends on the subject matter and the amount of details or the size of those details for that subject. So typically I like to do a little bit of clarity and texture, but I think for this image, I have enough contrast with dehaze alone. If you go too far, then you're going to add too much contrast and that looks unnatural. So I'm going to go back to +10. Now, before we get to the sky, which is going to have the most dramatic effect once we're done, is I want to create a gradient for the foreground here because I find this part of the image down here is too bright. So I'm going to go ahead and find my linear gradient tool here, and I'm going to create a mask. I'm going to go ahead and reverse this here. And this will allow me to create a gradient of darkness from dark to no edit from the top or from the bottom to the top here, and that will allow me to target my edit right to that gradient mask. So I'm going to go ahead and lower the exposure here to around -3/4 of a stop. So right there looks pretty good. And I think I need to do one more targeted adjustment to just our primary subject here in the foreground. I don't want to select this part of the image. So we're going to use a brush to create a mask just for this part of the image. Now, if you have an auto mask option, go ahead and turn it on because it's going to determine the edge of your subject and the other side of it, and it will allow you to keep that mask within that line or separated from the foreground and the background. Now, it's not 100% perfect. You're going to have to go in there and create a new brush to subtract or add to it as needed. So you can see here, it's not perfect. So now I need to zoom in and go ahead and go around it to fill in that mask. All right, as you can see, I went outside of the line and it's starting to select this ridge back here in the back. So I'm going to hold down my Alt or Option key to get the erase tool, and then I can subtract from the mask. If your editing software of choice doesn't have this option, you're going to have to select the erase brush separately, and then you can go ahead and subtract from the mask. So in Lightroom, we have a subtract option here or an add option, and then you can choose your method of adjustment that way. All right, now that I have that selected, I can go ahead and target my edits just to this ridge here. And because I'm finding the subject to be a little bit too dark still, I'm going to go ahead and slightly increase the exposure. I'm going to increase the whites, which is automatically going to make it brighter. I think I'm going to go all the way to +100. And then I'm going to go ahead and darken the blacks just a little bit, which also adds a little bit of contrast. I might need to make this just a tad brighter. Let's go ahead and set it right there. All right, we're almost done. The last step is to make our adjustments to the sky. And as you can see, it's really flat. So we need to add a little bit of contrast, and that should add some pop and magic to the sky so that those colors really come out more so than they are right now. It looks like it's also underexposed. Now, before we do that, I want to warm up the overall image just a little bit. It looks a little bit too cold, even though at this time of day, it is a little bit cooler. I do like my images to be a little bit warmer. So I'm going to go back to my tonal values here and adjust my temperature to be warmer. So maybe right around 6,000 or maybe more. I think right around 6,300 looks pretty good. And maybe just a little bit on the tint as well. All right, now let's go back and make our adjustments to the sky. So I think overall, we need to lower the exposure maybe 1 to 1.5 stops. So I'm gonna go ahead and adjust this till I see what I like. So maybe, I think right around 1.25 stops. Looks pretty good. We're gonna bring back some detail in those clouds by adjusting the highlights here to the left. So that's gonna make those clouds in the skies even darker the further I go with highlights. So we can definitely see it's much darker here at -100 versus -50, but I think this is too much. Once we add some contrast here, it's then going to add some definition to the clouds and separate them from the sky and make everything darker, richer, and much more colorful. And my favorite editing tool for making skies pop is Dehaze. Once we begin adjusting this to the right, you're gonna notice a huge transformation in the clouds. How cool is that? I love it. I'm also going to adjust the saturation just a little bit to bring out some more colors in the sky. But we have one problem. Not sure if you can see it, but if we zoom in here, it might be easier to see. And this is a huge mistake that I see a lot of beginners make when editing their photos. There's a little bit of a halo effect going on here. And remember, previously I mentioned if we invert that mask, it's going to bleed into the sky as well. So let's see if we can find it here. Did I already remove it all? I don't think I did. Let's check this side. So right there we can see it, and it's also on this part of the image as well. So I'm going to go ahead and subtract with the brush. I'm going to turn on the overlay so I can see that better. It's actually not showing up, but it is there because there's a slight halo going around the image. So I'm going to go ahead and erase all of this to get rid of it. Now it's real subtle. There's not a lot there, but it's enough to create a little bit of a halo. And you're probably not seeing it on your monitor with the compression of the video and everything. It's not going to show the same amount of pixels or resolution and the same quality that I'm seeing. You're probably not seeing on your end, but that's one thing that you want to be aware of when editing your images, is to ensure that you're not getting that halo effect. Here's the before and the after. And if you want to continue elevating your photographic skills, make sure to like and comment on this video to let me know that you want to see more editing tutorials like this one. Thanks for watching and have an awesome day.